you know any other of your colleagues who are supposed to be here and they are not here right now, please send them a reminder. Send emails to remind everybody. And we hope today's going to be great as well. So please remind your colleagues to join us. We are starting immediately. So welcome to day 2 of our Pro Engage Students Journalism Training. I believe we had a wonderful day yesterday. So Pro Engage is a voluntary class center for investigative journalism's campus-focused journalism development program designed to equip students of journalism and mass communication with the skills, ethics, and perspective required to practice public interest journalism in a rapidly evolving media landscape. And Pro Engage, like we said yesterday, works across 3 major themes in alignment with the WSCIJ's work: ethics, accountability, and public interest journalism, investigative and data-driven journalism, and media innovation, digital storytelling, and audience engagement. My name is Confidence Oju. We met yesterday, and I'm a communications officer at the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. The Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism is a not-for-profit, non-governmental organization dedicated to strengthening investigative journalism, promoting accountability, and advancing social justice in Nigeria. The center was founded in 2005 as the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Reporting Award. And then in 2008, it expanded to become the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. And like we said yesterday, our mission is to use the tools of investigative and accountability journalism to expose corruption, regulatory failures, and human rights violation through capacity development, rewarding best practices, knowledge creation, research, and advocacy, and collaboration with key stakeholders. And so once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us for day 2. So I would like to recognize the students in the room today. When I mention your school, I want you to give a round of applause to your school. Okay, so I'd like to welcome students from University of Abuja. Let me see your emojis. Let me know that students from University of Abuja here. I'd like to welcome, yes, Faith from University of Abuja. Yes, Chisom, I can see your reactions. I'd like to welcome students of the University of Abuja. I'd like to welcome students from Bayero University, Kano. Let me see your emojis. Let me know that we have students from Bayero University, Kano here in the room this morning. I'm aware that some persons have exams, but would like to see, okay. Also, we have Federal University of Kashere. Let's see, let's know that you are in the room. Federal University of Kashere, students from Federal University of Kashere. Okay, I can see Zainab, I can see Aisha. Thank you for being here today. Yes, FUK, all right. University of Ilorin, the Better by Far University. Let me see your emoji, let me see your excitement. University of Ilorin. Okay, I can see Nafisa, Josephine. Kwara State University, let me see your excitement. Kwara State University. Okay, I can see Latif. Federal Polytechnic Bida. Some persons are not in the room today. Okay, so please remind your colleagues to join us, and we are starting immediately. All right, so like I said yesterday, today's session is on story ideation. Today's session is going to give you an introduction into story ideation, and we're going to start with the session by our resource person, Adejumon Soyinka, and he's going to take the session for 40 minutes, after which we'll have question and answers for 20 minutes, and then we'll go into your breakout rooms. Now, I'd like to explain how the breakout sessions for today will work. So the breakout sessions for today will be in 5 different breakout sessions. Like yesterday, we had 2 breakout sessions, but today we're going to have 5 different breakout sessions, and you're going to come up with a story idea, and you're going to work with your group for 15 minutes, and then when you come back to the main room, you're going to present your story pitches for 4 minutes each for every group, and then you get feedback from our resource person. But before we go into today's session, I want to see how many of us remember what we learned yesterday. Yesterday, can someone tell me what was our focus area yesterday? You can tell me in the comment section, or let me see your hand up if you'd like to speak. Let me see. What did you learn yesterday? What did we do yesterday? I know we have lots of intelligent people in the room, and I'm pretty sure you haven't forgotten. All right. Ethics was the main focus. Yes, that's very correct. Thank you. So, what did we learn about ethics yesterday? What did we learn? Credibility. Thank you. Ethics. Elements of ethics. Correct. I learned that ethics is different from morality. Interesting. Thank you. Who else? Let me hear from one person who can really tell me what the fact checking. Thank you, Zainab. Who else? Who else? Who else? Um, the selling point for the business of news and media is credibility. Yes, I remember that our executive director, Mutswari Alaka, yesterday said that if the media has a product, then credibility is our USP, our unique selling point. Red flags in journalism. Yes, please let us know what are some of the red flags in journalism. What are some of the red flags? And who remembers, how was the debate yesterday? Let me see your feedback. How was the experience yesterday? Professionalism is the key in the practice of journalism, all right? Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's see. Let's get more. Let's get more answers. Elements of ethics. So what are those elements? What are those elements, Mercy? Let us know. What are the elements of ethics that you learned about yesterday? Facts, accuracy, and balance. Thank you. I want to get two more answers before we move into today's session. Two more answers, just two more answers. Navigating the ethical dilemmas, yes. Red flags in journalism, everyone's reporting it. I will fix it later. Just post it quickly. Thank you very much. Let's give media accountability. Thank you. Clear identity. Yes, that was the first thing Mutoria said yesterday. She said for you to be able to be ethical, you must begin by knowing your identity and having a clear identity, have your principles, and work with them. So, yes. Integrity over virality. All right, thank you, everybody. Please let's appreciate ourselves. Give yourself a round of applause. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you for learning. Thank you for paying attention. All right, so right now we're going to go into today's session and I'll briefly introduce the resource person for today. His name is Adejuwon Shoyinka and he's a two-time international Emmy-nominated investigative journalist and a documentary producer with about 26 years of experience across broadcast, digital, and print media. Currently the West Africa regional editor at The Conversation Africa. He specializes in bridging the gap between academic research and public knowledge for a global audience. As the founder of the Insight podcast, he provides evidence-based analysis on African governance and economic policy. His distinguished career includes pioneering the BBC Pidgin service and leading the Emmy-nominated BBC Africa Eye investigation, Sweet Sweet Coding, and Sex for Grades. He's a recipient of 12 major awards, including the Wole Soyinka Prize for Investigative Journalism. He has earned 11 additional international nominations from prestigious bodies like the Royal Television Society and the British Journalism Awards. So students, please put your hands together, put your virtual hands together, and let us welcome Mr. Adejuwon Shoyinka.
Okay. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Lovely. Good morning. I I heard you read the bio and I was wondering if you were talking about me. I was just here thinking, is that me or is that someone else? But it's lovely to be here this morning. Lovely to see the enthusiastic group that we have here. Bright, beautiful morning to your colleagues. As far as I know, I'm not so sure that there are student journalists in that sense. I think we're all journalists. And I think by the time we've gone through our sessions today, we'll begin to understand why I hardly see a difference between journalist in training, and maybe those of us who have been practicing for a few years. Because actually, what brings us together is there's a common denominator that brings us together as practitioners in the field. But then we will be getting into all of that just as I quickly share my screen. Right, one moment. I hope you can all see my screen now.
Yes, we can.
Lovely. So today we'll be talking about story ideation. How do you pitch stories that matter? And at the end of this session, at the end of the day, it will be my hope that we'll be in a position where we're able to identify strong real world stories. Oh, by the way, let me just quickly give you a caveat. This is not my real voice. In case you've heard my voice somewhere else before, you hear my voice somewhere else later, and you're wondering if you listen to the same person. This is not my real voice. This is a cough, you know, um, impacted voice. So just to say that, and also just to say that if you see me or hear me cough at some point in the course of this presentation, please do not panic. It's the kind of thing I've been dealing with in the last few days. Right. So at the end of this session, I'm hoping that we will be in a position where we can identify strong real world stories or story ideas, story ideas that we can actually deliver, so you don't just see this as a classroom exercise, but that's actually a real world exercise where we're able to come up with story ideas that we can deliver on and that can be published. And I'll tell you some stories about that maybe later on. Um, I'm hoping that we'll also be in a position where we can apply simple frameworks to develop raw ideas into viable, stories. By viable stories, stories that can be published and stories that can make impact in the society, and also be able to structure and deliver a basic um, but compelling story pitch. The kind of story pitches that editors will look at or commissioning editors will look at and not be able to put down, or not be able to overlook. So that's the kind of outcome I'm hoping that we'll have at the end of our session today. And I'm going to say this, as we start. What do you think is the difference between a student journalist and, for want of a better word to put it, a real journalist? What do you think is the difference? Can I have one or two persons volunteer a response to that, please? Do you think there's any difference? And maybe to ask confidence, what's the protocol? Do we allow participants to speak or do they drop a
Okay,
message?
so if you want to speak, please raise your hand and you'll be unmuted.
Brilliant. I think Blessings raised hand. Yes, Blessing.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I think the difference between a student journalist and a practicing journalist is experience. A student journalist is still being taught on what to do, the ethics, the principle, and how to carry out his or her duties. Why a practicing journalist is already in the field and is already working experience. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blessing. That's a valid point. I'm not sure in what order now, but based on what I can see on my screen, I think Ajiboye, we can take Ajiboye and Sumaya and then we move on.
Okay, good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning. Okay. Good
Yes,
morning,
please.
sir.
Yes, yeah, please go ahead. What do you think is the difference between a student journalist and a real journalist? I think your mic is mute now, Sumaya.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so what I know about a student journalist and a normal journalist is professionalism. A student journalist is just coming into the space of what journalist is all about. But a normal person that has gone through the classes, the experience, and everything about journalism.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Is that Ajiboye, right? I think that was Ajiboye. Yeah, Sumaya, your hand's up, and then we can move to the next.
Good morning, sir. Lesson said what I wanted to say. Like she said
Okay,
earlier,
okay,
young journalist, someone who is undergoing training, who needs to be taught the ethics and who needs to be groomed in before reporting or going on assignments or stuff.
lovely. Okay, thank you. I love the fact that you're all participating. If you've raised your hand now and we've not been able to call you, we will get to you at some point. This is going to be an interactive session that we're going to have here today. You've all given very important and very correct answers to the question of what's the difference between a student journalist and a real journalist. However, I'm just going to summarize it in a way that I think is very simple. And for me, the difference between a student journalist and I don't like the word real journalist because actually, yeah, you can say I struggle with it because actually there's not much difference. I think the only difference that exists is our ability to spot what is newsworthy at any point in time, and I think that is what separates who a journalist is from who isn't a journalist, regardless of what may be their current status, whether they are student journalists or they are practicing journalists. Because in the end, even those of us who are practicing are also students in a way. We're students of life, we're students of the journalism practice in itself. We're learning every day. So I've done it for maybe 27 years now. In those 27 years, I've learned every single day. Each story teaches you a different experience, brings you into a different realm of practice. And with each one, you just learn something new. So, so for me, the difference between a student journalist and a practicing journalist would be the ability to see what others can't see. You probably traveled from point A to point B today, and in the course of that journey, you've walked past several story ideas. Sometimes you didn't see them. Someone else may see them as story ideas, and that's what separates, you know, a journalist from a non-journalist. Um, and that takes us into now getting into what we really want to deal with today. What is journalism in itself? It's not just the theory of journalism as we learn it in school. It's about the ability to observe and to question. Some of the biggest investigations and some of the biggest stories that I have handled, for instance, they didn't start with some kind of big idea from somewhere or from the outer space. You know, they started with oftentimes they started with small inconsistencies somewhere, something unusual that we noticed somewhere, or to even shock you, sometimes something so usual, so common happening right under our noses. And because it is so common, we don't see it as a news idea. So it's not only when something has happened that is so unusual and so uncommon that it makes it a big story. Sometimes it is the common thing you see every day. And in fact, those ones are actually the most dangerous because you've been so used to them, you think they are normal. But actually, it's not normal. Or occasionally you feel like something is not right here, but you haven't just given it enough time to think about what is not right about what you're going through. But this is the usual practice. This is what everybody does every day. Therefore, you just overlook it. And I will give you um, some of these examples as we move along. But but I think just as I was being introduced, Confidence mentioned one story that perhaps some of us may have heard about before, which is sex for grades. Now, sex for grades, was a BBC investigative documentary that I was one of the executive producers, and we focused on universities in Nigeria and in Ghana. And the idea of, some unscrupulous lecturers propositioning female students for sex in exchange for grades is something that is so, I mean, I don't know what happens nowadays, but when I went to school, it was so common, and when my, older brothers and sisters went to school, it was so common. And the generation behind me also, it was so common. So it almost became like, it's so common that you didn't think that there was a story idea in it, because you actually, if you pass through a university and you're female, you probably had a direct experience yourself, or a friend of yours had a direct experience, or even for those of us who are males, we had sisters, we had, friends, female friends, classmates who've had those kind of experiences. So it was so common. And yet it's something that happened right under our noses. And it's one of those examples of you being able to spot something that everybody says that is common, but yet it is big enough for you to be able to do a big story out of it. And it's one of those stories that got us Emmy nomination out of Nigeria. So where you think powerful stories come from, oftentimes they may not actually be from those places. They may just be from the usual thing you see every day, the bus stop you pass through every day, the people you interact with every day, the park you walk through every day, the the gate you pass through every day at your universities. Those things you see around you almost on a daily basis and look so ordinary, oftentimes will land you a big story. And basic thing to take away from this is understanding that, look, journalism is not just about uh, waiting for stories. It's about you actively looking out for stories, actively seeing what others ignore. And that's what sets you apart from non-journalists, regardless of whether you're a student journalist or you are actually a practicing journalist. I think the next question will then be, so where do we get these stories from? You know, um, one of you may be thinking, okay, this man, I've spoken all this to Shina. How do we see these stories that you're talking about? And I quickly tell you that stories, usually from my own experience, live in major, broad, key areas. So stories live among people, you know, and by that I mean experiences of people, the kind of injustices that people go through sometimes, the kind of survival that people have gone through sometimes, and the kind of changes that have happened to people around us or to us, over time. Stories are embedded in those lived experiences. Stories are also embedded in systems. So government agencies, institutions, including our universities, the police, any kind of government agencies around us that we interact with or that we see their activities around us, stories live in those places. Stories also live in data. In most cases, in fact, a lot of stories are hidden in data. Um, Either the part of the data that is thrown at us, or the part of the data that the data source has decided to be quiet about. So when somebody comes to you and says 60% of Nigerian men are going through XYZ, right? Now, whoever it is that has thrown that data at you wants you to focus on 60%, right? And that's why 60% has been highlighted to you. But the reality is that when you throw that kind of figure at me, I'm going to look at the 60%, quite all right. But I'm also going to ask myself, what's happening to the 40% that you have not mentioned? Is there something about that 40% that may turn out to even be bigger than the 60% that you have thrown at us? So you find that data sometimes can hide as much as it has revealed, or sometimes it can actually hide even more than it has attempted to reveal. But it's our business, it's our responsibility as journalists to look out for that which hasn't been said. Because actually, the essence, the very essence of our professional calling is to put out there the information, the material, the fact that someone somewhere does not want to be out there. That's what separates us from public relation practitioners, for instance. And that's what separates us from other practitioners who may get involved in storytelling in one form or the other. The core of our own professional calling is to be able to identify that which powerful people do not want told and then tell it, and bring it out to the public. So this is broadly where you find stories, people in systems and in data. But then, what are those red flags you also want to look at for while you're trying to, get your stories? I think I mentioned some of them already in terms of when I was talking about data and the fact that sometimes or oftentimes data may hide far more than it actually appeared to expose. And it's our responsibility to notice that gap, to notice that contradiction, the difference between what has been said and what hasn't been said, the difference between what is said and what exactly is happening. Because sometimes there is a wide gulf between what is being said and people's realities, people's lived realities. And so it's our business as journalists to be able to see that difference and go for that gap and tell the story that gap represents, because oftentimes that gap speaks to what is missing, speaks to what is not being said, speaks to what in most cases the powerful are trying to hide from the public. So that's where we come in as journalists and try to push that. The other thing we notice is patterns. Uh, is there something that repeats itself every time? I notice, for instance, that if you carefully read through statements issued by government officials, especially around certain events or activities that have been happening repeatedly for years, the chances are that you might then begin to see that oftentimes these statements are standard copies. What is different between what was issued last year and what is issued this year is just the date and maybe a few other little, facts. Otherwise, it's essentially the same thing. Something has happened, and then the government uses words like we will investigate and bring the culprits to justice. You just then need to go back and ask yourself, how many times has that been said about this particular incident? Say, let's say there's Boko Haram struck somewhere in Borno, and then you go back and check and find out that the last chief of army staff said exactly the same thing that the current chief of army staff has said. You might even find that the last three chief of army staffs have said exactly the same thing. Each time similar things, have happened almost in the same place. And that's, I'm saying it from experience because I've seen this happen. You will find out that it's exactly the same statement. Each time a new Inspector General of Police comes into office, one of the first few things they tell you is that they are abolishing checkpoints across the country. And I can make this an assignment after this training. Go back and check, pick the names of the last 3 or 4 Inspector Generals of Police and search if they ever made that statement. And you will find out that almost all of them said something similar to, oh, we're abolishing checkpoints, we're bringing in discipline into the police, we're not going to allow indiscipline. But then, a few weeks into his tenure, the indiscipline that perhaps trained him as well will continue to happen until the next IG comes in to repeat the same promises. Now, that in itself is a story idea that one can pick up. If you're able to pick previous statements and be able to match them, you will come out with an analytical piece that exposes a pattern of major gap between major accountability gap really between what these individuals have said and what they end up doing. Then there's the part of silence, what no one is talking about. Something that's happening that almost everybody can see, but nobody is talking about it. These are red flags, these are pointers that you can pick. These are things that can easily point us to the direction of a major story happening around us. And I haven't said that. It's also important to note that when we try to come up with a story idea, we also then need to begin to think about how does this impact people, and by people, I mean you trying to define who your primary audiences are. So if your primary area of coverage is, let's say, Cardinal State, for instance, and you're thinking of a big story, but that story has national implication, but does it also have a local impact in Cardinal State? And if it does have a local impact in Cardinal State, the next question is how does it affect people in Cardinal? And how do you then frame your story in such a way that it zeroes in on how it affects your primary audience so that it doesn't look like you're just saying things that is totally abstract, to people around you. And a good example is, okay, so you look at a national question like, okay, education funding needs to be increased. The education sector in Nigeria is suffering from a major paucity of fund, so that can be a story idea, right? But what angle of it do you want to pick? How do you localize that story to your specific area? So if you're in Kano, for instance, you may then begin to look at a story angle that looks at why are schools in Kano lacking teachers, or why are schools in Kano lacking basic facilities for science or for STEM. That then begins to on the story or narrow the story down to the local impact of how does this impact my own primary audiences. And then at that point, you begin to see that you're connecting more with your audiences than just telling a broad, sometimes national story that may not necessarily, or international story that may not necessarily impact them. Or if you're unable to draw a connection between that international or national issue and the lives of your primary audiences, because in most cases there's a connection. It's just that we need as journalists to be able to draw that connection and be able to show how it impacts their life. Someone may think, okay, the crisis going on in the Middle East between Iran and the US and Israel, it's not my business because I'm in Kano. But the reality is that it's my business even in Kano, because there's a way that crisis impacts my cost of transport, for instance. There's a way it impacts cost of food in Kano. There's a way it impacts my life in Kano. So it's my responsibility as a journalist to, even when I want to tell that kind of international story, find a way to connect it to the real life experience of my primary audience. So let me ask you this question, and you may just note it down if you have someone who can quickly answer. What is that one problem in your school or community that people have accepted as normal, and that you think is not is something that is abnormal? Do we have someone? I just want to, one person response to that. Saliu Ibrahim.
Yeah, hello, good morning. My name is Moazu Salim from Bayero University, Kano.
Okay.
Yes, students around the school have accepted exploitation of prices, knowing fully well that the prices around either in the market or places are way far away from school are very, very different from what is around the school. And we have accepted it so much that it is our new reality. And nobody is even talking about that. Then there is also issue of agents concerning houses around school, where there are exorbitant amount of money agents are charging students for all of these houses. We have accepted it, even though it's not normal, charging more than 20% of whatever it is you're paying for rent. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And that is a key story idea for you. And that's also a key lesson in how to identify a story idea. If something feels normal but shouldn't be normal, then that's a story. You know, if something feels like everybody's doing it, it looks normal around us, but you can tell that it doesn't, it shouldn't be normal, then that's something, it tells you that there's something in that that requires further development into a story idea. And if you do develop it into a story idea, you'll be amazed, pleasantly amazed at how that story will perform by the time you've published the story. Now, so how do you move from idea to a story? How do you transition from, okay, I've noticed this thing that is not normal or that appears normal, but it shouldn't be normal, and now I want to move it into a story that can be published. The first thing is you need to define your core question. You know, that those core questions that every story need to be able to answer. And what are those core questions? One, what is it that is happening? You know, you need to be able to define what exactly is it that is happening. You need to be able to define why that thing matters. You know, you also need to be able to define who is affected by that thing that you found or that you're talking about that is happening. Like the example that Muhammad gave us just now. What's happening? You know, students are being charged exorbitant rates. So it's almost like there's a special price for students. Why does it matter? It impacts students' livelihood. It impacts their, cost of living. It impacts the quality of life that students live, in student accommodation or in communities around tertiary institutions. And I can assure you, what you just described is not happening only around your school. It's almost the experience of students almost in every other part of the country that, prices are kind of designed around university communities in a way that more or less, ends up exploiting students. So you find that that story will resonate with other student communities, across the country. So that begins to answer the question of why does it matter in terms of how it impacts people's lives and in terms of how it impacts other students in other places. And then, of course, you've been able to define who is affected by the story. The other important point is, being able to answer the question of how do you define the right angle of telling that story? How do you choose the right angle of telling the story? And I'm one big fan of the human angle stories, because I believe that in most cases, stories do well when the audiences can see themselves either directly or potentially in the kind of stories that you're telling them. When you tell the story of someone, you tell the story from the angle or from the eye of someone who has experienced it. It goes a long way in resonating with audiences. Then, of course, there is the accountability angle, holding power to account, holding the leadership to account, holding people who are supposed to do the right thing to account. The data angle we discussed earlier on, being able to use data as a peg or as an entry point to tell a story. Then, of course, there's a whole gamut of what is described as solutions journalism and solutions angle to storytelling. So sometimes everybody's talking about the problem, but you want to take your own story angle from how do we solve this problem? You know, perhaps you found examples in other communities where that problem has been solved, or at least attempts have been made to solve that problem. And so you want to start your story from that angle of either that successful attempt or even the ongoing attempt to solve the problem. And from there, you come into talking about what the real issue is. Then again, the question of how do you map your story from idea to sources to evidence and to risk. Now, that's a lot, you know, crammed into one slide. Everything we've been talking about so far is about idea. How do you conceive idea? In fact, that's what this whole session is about. Ideation. How do we come about the process of conceiving idea and moving it from idea stage to, you know, to outright production. But you have to have a guide when you go through that. And usually you need a simple structure that looks at what's the headline idea, what's what's the first thing you want people to see when they look at that story, then what's the core question of that story idea in itself, which you've mentioned, Sally, the other time about, the example of students and exorbitant cost of livelihood around, that's the core question. Who are the key characters or sources that you want to be talking to? A straightforward example again, dealing with students. You've given us an example of what's happening to students around. So we can talk about the students themselves are the primary sources that you want to talk to, the key characters whose story you want to tell. So you may want to tell that story through the perspective of a student whose feeding allowance can no longer, whose monthly feeding allowance can no longer take him or her beyond a week or beyond 2 days. And then we tell the story of why this is happening and how progressively this has been the case. Then you start to think of what are the evidences that you would need in telling that story, so that by the time you've told the story, you're not running into a legal challenge, or you're not just even running into, an integrity challenge. Somebody coming up to say, look, you lied. Everything you said did not happen, does not happen, never exists. So you conjured it in your head. So you need evidences. So if a student says, look, I now pay X amount for transport, in what way can we evidence that? You know, and be able to defend ourselves if someone were to challenge that figure that we mentioned. Then you also want to think about potential risk of that story. Because often cases, what I notice is that some of our colleagues would publish a story, and then after start, what can go wrong? Actually, you have to think of what can go wrong while you're planning itself. So risk assessment, especially for those of us who do investigative journalism, risk assessment is an integral part of your story pitch and of your story ideation and of your story planning. So by the time, while we're telling that story, what are the risks we're likely exposed to? By the time the story is told or published, what are the risks that you're likely exposed to as the journalist? What are the risks that your sources are likely exposed to? And that can then determine whether you want to keep some of your sources anonymized or you want them to be fully named in the story. It's your understanding of the risk that will determine, all of that. So these are some of the things that you should put in mind or keep in mind when you are thinking of story ideas and how to, and how to develop them. And of course, then you want to talk about who do you talk to in telling your story. And we've kind of addressed that by using the example of students, But it's not just students, because students are the ones experiencing the cost of living. But that is coming from some people. So the service providers are also a major plank in telling this story. So the students are the ones who are affected. So who are those that are responsible for what is affecting those students? So you also want to look at them and potentially talk to them. So if it is transport, do you want to talk to drivers union? Do you want to talk to the actual drivers themselves? Do you want to talk to a few landlords, traders around the area? Why is it that your cost is higher than other places? So you but that's this that we may want to talk about in that context. You experts in the field of what you're talking about. Then the authorities, the university authorities themselves, or maybe the local government authority, or anyone else who has some kind of control or some kind of authority around that area. So that's the kind of thing you want to look at when you're telling these kind of stories. Then what are the basics of what makes a good pitch? The idea must be clear. It must be, clear to anyone who's looking at it what the story is. So you'll be able to answer the question, what is this story? And why are we telling this story now? And then of course also what is new? Why should people the story that we want to tell now? And also how do we go about reporting that story? So we need to have that clarity of how we want to report the story. We need to have that clarity of why it matters at this point. We also want to have clarity about what is different, what is new that we're talking about in this story idea that we want to push out there. When we have clarity about what it is that's happening, why are we telling it now? Why does it matter? What's new? And then how do we report it? Then we begin to set aside the differences between what is a bad pitch and what is a good pitch. Because if you're able to do everything we've spoken about so far in putting together a pitch, it then becomes clear to you the major difference that exists between what a bad pitch is and what a good pitch is. And I think one major broad thing that you can take away from me in trying to determine the difference between a bad and a good pitch is how vague the idea is. If the idea is hugely vague, then you can be sure it's a bad pitch. But if the idea is narrowed down and speaks about clearly identify what the story idea is, what the core question is, why it matters, who is affected, and what the reporting plan is, and the reporting plan will also include risk analysis or risk assessment, then you have a good pitch. And I think the key thing to bear in mind when you consider the difference between a bad and a good pitch is that at the end of the day, whoever it is you are pitching it to as an editor will not fund you simply because you have an idea. They would fund you because you have, clarity of that idea. So at the end of the day, what is being funded is the clarity of your idea and not just your idea. And we can quickly just run through some of the common mistakes that people make when we pitch. Like I mentioned earlier on, if it is too broad, the idea is too broad, trying to cover everything. If the idea is too, if there's no clearly defined angle in telling the story, um, if there's no clearly defined evidence and how to get that evidence, and there is no plan of how to tell the story, and the plan is not clearly defined, then you can be sure that at the end of the day, you're not going to be ending up with a good pitch or with a fundable pitch or with a pitch that can end up being a good story. And from everything that I have learned, from everything that I have experienced so far, I can tell you that what would what actually fails a lot of ideas is that, story ideas fail at this entry stage, not even at the reporting stage, but at the stage where you are conceiving the idea. Is it too broad? Is it, are you not able to define who your audience will be, define whose story you're telling, define why it matters right now, and define how you're going to tell it in a different manner. If you're not able to identify all of that, then the story has failed at the ideation stage. Then, of course, access needs to be built through trust. And trust me, is not tied to titles. So you could be editor this, editor that. But if you've lost your integrity over the years, um, stories travel. People know who they can trust and who they can't trust with sensitive information, for instance. And at that point, you failed already, even before you can conceive the idea. And the ethics is so important. It is not optional because it is what protects you and protects your story. It's what stands you out as a professional and stands you out as someone that is different from the rest of the crowd. And then persistence in journalism is is just not something you can joke with. It's what makes the difference between who a real journalist or who a successful journalist is, and who I'm sorry to say, a mediocre journalist would be. You need to be persistent. You need to have curiosity. You need to ask uncomfortable questions. You need to be the kind of person that would not take no um, for an answer. And my final thought would be to tell you, look, stories are everywhere. The question is, can you see them? And I think that's where we started off when we were defining the difference between a real student, a journalism student and a practicing journalist. And I remember I told you then that, look, what makes the difference is not the title, it's not even the education, it's not the degree, it's the ability to see what others are not seeing, or to identify a story in something that is so common, that is so usual, that thousands of people have walked past every day, and yet it is going to land you a big story. And from the personal experience, I mentioned earlier on the idea of sex for grades, for instance. I'll give you maybe one more example that comes to mind from personal experience again. When we did the Sweet Sweet Coding story, that story came from someone telling us or showing us a video of young chaps, secondary school students who had a party, I think something like a birthday party or something like that. And at that party, they served bottles of codeine on the table, like drinks, alongside your normal Coke and Pepsi and stuff. And and for me as the editor, I saw that video and I was told by my colleagues that, oh, that's normal. Young people nowadays drink codeine freely. This is what happens at parties nowadays. And when I expressed, shock, I was told, oh, you're old school. You don't understand. This is what happens nowadays. So I said, okay, fine. And then somebody said they were going to do the story of how young people nowadays, drink codeine recreationally, kind of. And I said, all right, that's fine. But there's a bigger story as well. And the bigger story is the question of, from my own experience, codeine is a prescription medication, meaning you have to have a prescription, a doctor's prescription, to be able to buy a bottle of codeine. Now, if you find a scenario where codeine is served on table at a party, it meant that whoever was serving it had bought codeine in cartons, right? So if you needed prescription to get a bottle and someone could buy it in cartons, it raises the question of access. how do they access that large quantity? How is it possible for young chaps to access large quantity of an otherwise controlled substance? You see, at that point, the story began to take a bigger shape, where we then started looking at, okay, there must be some gap in the chain of command in the pharmaceutical industry in Nigeria and the supply chain. So where is that gap? And so we started tracking the gap. And in tracking the gap, it took us down a major rabbit hole where we found that actually, yes, there's gap. Yes, the gap is beyond even pharmaceutical stores. And the gap traces back to the factories, traces back to senior people in the industry, executives of some of those companies, and it then took us into another rabbit hole where we found that these executives, being smart, do not directly relate with the end users of the legal business. They actually have middlemen, and the middlemen turned out to be court boys. And for us as BBC, we knew that to be able to tell a bigger story, we must be able to nail the big people behind this business. So I needed to be able to sit in front of one or two of them. And we realized that I couldn't do that if I wasn't introduced by people in the business. And the only people who could introduce me were those cultists who they use as middlemen. So I then had to go undercover, embed with the cult boys, and got their confidence, and then got them to introduce me to their suppliers. And so after a while, I got to a position where I was sitting in meetings with these pharmaceutical executives and discussing big business, which of course, unknown to them, was being recorded. And that's how we were able to tell that story, Sweet Sweet Pudding, that gave us the very first Emmy nomination in news and current affairs for Nigerian journalists. And so you see how ideas start from something often common, sometimes seen as normal, and sometimes seen as, oh, it's no big deal, you know. But you can build on it and begin to ask more and more questions and look at those areas that haven't been told, those areas that people have been silent about. And when you dig up those areas, you find out that you have a big story on your hand. I leave you with this final thought. If your story really, and that's one thing I always use as a yardstick for myself and the kind of stories I get involved in, is that if your story does not make someone, especially someone powerful, uncomfortable, then you're probably not asking the right questions. I think you should please think about that more carefully, note it down, and use it as a guiding point, as a guiding compass as you move along in your career as a journalist. Always think about the fact that you need to tell a story. You're not just telling any kind of story. Your story has answered all the questions that we've raised earlier on, about how to get a good pitch. So you've answered all of that. But in the final analysis, does it make someone uncomfortable? Does it make someone actually powerful uncomfortable? If it doesn't, that means you haven't asked the right questions. So go back and ask those right questions. Thank you very much for being attentive. And also thank you for being, for participating, answering questions and engaging. Really, really appreciate your time. Thank you. And now I'm open to questions as well.
Okay, everybody, let me see your virtual round of applause, your appreciation to Mr. Adejuwon. That was a very insightful session. Thank you. Yeah, let me see the excitement in the room. Yes, so right now we're going to take questions and answers, after which we'll take our poll. So if you have a question, okay, I see some persons already raising up their hands. If you have a question, you can send it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and you'll be unmuted. So I think Salih Ibrahim has a question. Please go ahead.
A very good morning to you all again, or it's afternoon already, so good afternoon. So yeah, my question is you mentioned persistence. So where does persistence cross to harassment? Because in your bid to pursue a story, trying to ask questions and then you are being rejected again and again and again. Where do you cross the line from persistence to harassment? Thank you.
Thank you, Salih. Excuse me. Persistence and harassment. Well, frankly, in the world that we live in nowadays, it's a thin line. However, for us, what protects us is our integrity as journalists and our professionalism as journalists. So if I'm interested in speaking to you, Salih, and the reason I want to talk to you is because of a story that I am working on. My communication with you will be very clear, will be very specific, and it will be about what the story is about, right? And in most cases, the way I operate would be to reach out to you, in the most formal and respectable way that I can afford to do that. And if that means calling you on the phone, if that means writing a letter to your office officially, I'm going to pursue it that way. And I'm pursuing it that way because when you think about a story idea, like we said earlier on, one of the risks of a story idea also is legal risk. So it's not just risk to person, right? It's also the potential for legal risk. So Sally, I wanted to interview you for a story, and certain allegations have been made about you, and I needed you to respond to them because I wanted to be fair and I wanted to be balanced in my reporting, and I've reached out to you. I need to reach out to you in a way that I can document, in a way that I can provide proof tomorrow that I reached out to Saliu on, Thursday, 23 April 2026, and Saliu responded in this way, or Saliu didn't respond at all. And then I gave him another 1 week, and I went back to him, or I gave him 24 hours, or I gave him, So my contact with you will be very professional, will be very clear. It will not leave you in any doubt. And ultimately, my integrity as a journalist. So I've not come to Saliu to say, Saliu, if you don't speak or if you don't say it this way or that way, we'll go ahead and do this story. If you don't give me 10,000 naira now, we're going to do this story and we will embarrass you. That's where you cross the line from being professional to being unprofessional to actually basically hounding someone. And that's even when you become a blackmail, right? The moment you subject your story or the idea of you doing your story or not doing your story to monetary compensation, then you've lost the plot as a journalist. Your professionalism shield is removed at that point. And you really, in my book, you can no longer call yourself a journalist. You're just a blackmail, right? So if you stay on the path of professionalism and you keep the ethics of the profession and you ask someone for a response and you document your process, if they eventually do not respond, you go ahead with your story, but you have record that you've given them the opportunity to speak. Thank you. I
All
hope
right,
that
thank you.
answered your question, though.
Thank you, Mr. Digimon. I would like to recognize the presence of Dr. Balka Maina from the Federal University of Kashere. Thank you for joining us again today. He also has a question. He's the head of department, mass communication, Federal University of Kashere. Dr. Maina, please.
Yeah. Hello. Good afternoon. Okay. I'm joining later to attend to some function in the school before coming. So I'm sorry for joining in late today. I found it very interesting, your discussion and things you said. I don't know whether you've addressed the question I want to ask, but I will still ask it. So because I came late, so I'm sorry for that and I apologize. So I was in touch with some journalists, investigative journalists, like here in the northeastern part, we have Mr. Haruna, who has Wiki Times in Bauchi, and I had attended programs organized by Northeastern University where Anas Ayumayahu Anas was there in attendance, and he shared some personal experiences about harassment. And I read some documents about journalist safety around reporting issues in the northeastern part of Nigeria. So I've seen series and patterns of harassment on investigative journalists. And the last part that you talked about going undercover, and mostly we talked about those things in class, and we just teach students from the theoretical perspective, not really getting the experience like journalists do on the field. So now the question I want to ask is, one of the adaptations I saw from the documents I read is that some journalists, instead of using their names as the bylines for the stories they have, they liaise with other journalists from other places to write the bylines for stories they cover in northern part of Nigeria so that to avoid the harassment. But you still discover, like for instance, my friend who has this Wiki Times outfit in Bauchi has been experiencing serious attack even on the journalists there in his workers in the office, and they operate strictly online as a way of adapting. So for you now, I don't know, could you tell us how you've been able to adapt to all this kind of harassment, knowing fully well that going undercover could mean your life going? Because from the stories I read about Anna's, I think there are so many cases where he lost his brothers, he killed people, and people are scared of keying into the investigative journalism field of space. So I just want you to tell us about the adaptation, about the emotional, how you adapt to the emotional issues relating to investigative journalism. So I think we could teach our students better. So it's just about the adaptation in terms of harassment and the attacks. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mena. What you touched on is the question you've raised is something. I said earlier on that, okay, so this is my 27th year of being a journalist. All of it, or most of it, all of it in investigative journalism. I started my career with Tell magazine in Nigeria. And of course, I believe you know what it meant to be at Tell magazine back then. So it's been a consistent thing. And what I'm trying to drive at is this. I don't think that I have fully learned what it means so far, and I don't think we can completely learn it. It's an ongoing experience, it's an ongoing lesson. Each story comes with its own challenges, and the challenges that I'm talking about range from when we are covering or reporting the story. So maybe I go undercover and do a story. In the course of the undercover itself, there can be issues. The example I gave earlier on of me embedding with cult gangs, in order to get through to the top chain of the pharmaceutical industry responsible for that leakage. I just paraphrased it, but I can give you a practical example of one of the experiences I had on one of my undercover meetings with those guys. We were somewhere in Mushin, Lagos, a very, 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 very extremely notorious place in Mushin, Lagos, where you couldn't even enter that area if you were not a criminal, if you were not a member of one of those gangs, right? The gang leader who took me there, we passed through 3 checkpoints mounted by these criminals before we could actually access the main place. And we were there, just gisting, amongst them. And I'm talking about a scenario where I was talking with them, and they were introducing different, because I came in as a big businessman, so they saw me as a potential big businessman who wanted to bring in a lot of money into their illicit trade. So the guys I was dealing with were also introducing other guys in case. So there was somebody they introduced. The guy said, Baba, in case my own business, I don't do codeine, I don't do drugs. My own is in case you want to kill somebody. Just give me 10,000 naira and give me the person's picture. Person is dead. That's what I do. This one is an arm robber. That one is this. That one is that. So they were introducing all those kind of people, in that environment. And I sat with them and we were gisting. And unfortunately, as we were gisting, they told me that 3 days ago, they had a clash with the police and they killed some policemen. So I knew immediately that it was the wrong time for me to be in that environment. And as I had thought, of course, policemen came back while we were in that meeting, and there was a shootout because these boys all had guns anyway. So we started running in different directions. They took positions and started shooting. I had to run behind the gang leader that brought me in and stayed with him. Because if I ran away from them, I could even run into the police, and the police would be justified to shoot me on the spot anyway. Because the assumption of the police is that anybody in that circle must be a criminal, right? And I hadn't gone there with my ID card, so there was nothing to separate me or identify me as a journalist. Plus, even if I managed to escape at that point, I then would have blown my cover because then those criminals will realize that I wasn't who I said I was, right? So I stayed with them all through that shootout. Now, that was a risk at that point. By the time you've published the story, and then the criminals realized that the guy who met with them was actually an undercover reporter. That created a different set of risk because then they came after me, came after my family. So we've had those kind of experiences. I've had instances where I've done stories with my full name and my face on it, like the Codeine one I gave you. When we did Sex for Grades, I couldn't even do undercover. Anyway, we needed female undercover reporters. So I was just executive producer at the back end, trained the female undercover reporters, deployed them, and supervised the process, and then we got the story done. So that's another range of experience. And then later we discovered that the codeine and the bad drugs and tramadol and all sorts of names that are called tapentadol and the rest of it that's being sold in Nigeria and is killing a lot of young people actually are coming from India. And we tracked and discovered that there's a big factory, a WHO certified company in India that produces those things. Now I tracked them to India. That story was published in February last year. In that case, I sat one-on-one with the criminal and the director, the owner of the factory in India. And again, I was undercover. But of course, I couldn't wear any disguise to go into that kind of meeting. So he saw me clearly and he thought he was dealing with an investor. And we took pictures. Normally, if a big investor comes to your company, would you take pictures with them? So we took pictures. He has my pictures. I have his pictures. But by the time we published the story, our risk assessment suggested that we should blur my face from the story. Now, reduce the number of people in that criminal chain between India and their supply chain goes through Niger sometimes, through the Lela border, through Sokoto into northern Nigeria, and sometimes through the southern parts, Ghana, Benin Republic, into Lagos, right? So there's a huge command chain of criminals involved. We wanted to limit the number of them who could identify me freely on the street to just the guy I met in India and took pictures with. So therefore, in publishing the story, we blotted my face out. So you have to take those kind of risk assessment decisions, which is why I mentioned risk assessment when we were talking about planning a story. You have to think about risk during the coverage, risk post-production. And when we properly thought about them, we put them into practice and hope for the best. And I think it's just about that. Yeah, but it comes with a lot of, sometimes psychological, concerns. You constantly looking over your shoulder. You're constantly thinking who is after you, who is not after you. You determine where you go. You limit where you go. You take some precautions, for yourself as well, and that's it. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's like
Yes, you have.
asking me to compress 27 years experience in a few minutes. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Tejo. So we're going to take two more questions from the comment section. I know a lot of us have a lot of questions, but we have limited time. So I'll take the first question in the comments, the chat box rather. Who are
Okay.
the right authorities to report issues to when a journalist faces harassment from a public figure after publishing a story? This question is from Dorcas Sampson.
There are two sides to it. There's the professional groups and then there's the state authorities. Yeah, someone harasses you, that borders on crime. So the police should be involved or at least informed. I understand the realities of Nigeria. There are times when even the police is the one doing the harassment, right? Sometimes it may mean going a few steps higher than the particular police group that is harassing you, and sometimes that may help resolve the crisis. It may be that the local guys are just being unethical, and maybe if you go a few notches ahead of them or above them, that may bring them back to order. But you also have to pair that with having professional groups and professional support system. As journalists, especially operating in Nigeria, you know, groups like the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, groups like the International Press Institute, there is the Committee for the Protection of Journalists. Those are the kind of groups that you should begin to cultivate as student journalists and build relationships with them. Just take part in their programs and let them know you exist in the ecosystem. And so if there's a problem, you can also let them know. They've got a lot of experience and they've got a lot of resources, including lawyers and, maybe more experienced professionals in the field that they can also pull in to provide some kind of coverage and support for you when something of that nature happens. In most cases, our strength actually lies in our numbers and in our unity and our capacity to make a lot of noise. Um, I'm sorry, I remember something now. I think it was the Equatorial Guinea guy that was removed and went on in a coup that went online and said people should make some noise, but not that kind of noise, but the noise that journalists can make. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Adejuwon. So the other questions that are being asked seem a bit related to the ones that have already been answered before. I think some persons really want to know how you've been able to handle some of the challenges in your journey as a journalist. So I hope that one day you get a personal contact with him so you can tell your stories. Well, we have limited time, so we'll take one last question from Ismail Gambo Muhammad. Please go ahead. We have limited time. Please go straight to the point. I can't see his hand anymore. Okay, I think he lowered his hand. So, okay, we have one from Mariam Abimbola. Please go ahead.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shitu Miriam Abimbola from University of Abuja. So, sir, in lecture hall, we've had similar situations where our lecturers have told us that after some journalists report a case, they have to go for therapy because of the intense situation of how it is. Have there been any situation like that you had to go for therapy due to a case which you had to go and investigate?
Thank you. Personally, I haven't had to go through therapy. I don't know whether that's a good thing or it's a bad thing. I think time would tell. Um, but I think it's good to go to therapy because I think it might help. We may our professionals who may be able to guide you on, how to on see or unlearn some of the things you've seen. Eh, but I don't know. I'm talking to students, yes, I'm being very careful, right? And so we would stick to what is standard. And what is standard is that if you feel that you need therapy, please reach out. If you feel that you need help, please reach out. The professional therapists that can deal with that. But then there are also instances where we learn from ourselves, from each other and, lean on each other as journalists. I speak about my own experience. I know people internationally in the field of investigative journalism who have far more experience than I do, who have seen so much that when they tell their own story, I open my mouth in amazement as well. And so what I'm trying to say is when I'm challenged, I speak to them. Some of them are my mentors. I speak with them and they share their experience with me and guide me as well. But it's a lifelong thing, really. It's a lifelong thing with the question around how do you cope with the aftermath of investigative journalism and the aftermath of sometimes undercover reporting. I think it's a lifelong thing. I know that, for instance, I'll give you a quick instance. There was a story I did, or a series of cover stories I did for Tell magazine back then when I was at Tell, about a criminal gang that specialized in stealing people's properties in Nigeria, especially in Lagos. And their modus operandi is they look at a house, they like the house, they will produce a set of fake documents, of that property, and then use that document to sell the property to another person in their gang. And then the buyer, the so-called buyer, approaches the owners of the property and tells them, I've just bought this house. So imagine you are in your house and somebody comes and says, well, I've just bought this house. And you're like, no, I didn't sell my house. But they show you documents that says that you've sold, you know, and trouble starts from there. And these guys were working with men of the special anti-robbery squad in the police, and they had touts, they had all sorts of groups, so they killed a lot of people. They will forcefully take over their property, and they did that in several places. you know there's a particular property, if you're familiar with Lagos, at Allen Avenue, the roundabout at Allen, you know a twin set of big buildings on the left when you drive into Allen. That was the last they did that got me involved. And then I started investigating them. I think I did about 2 cover stories on them. Long and short, they attacked my house and all of that. But ultimately, they were jailed. Where I'm going is this. They were arrested. The leaders of that gang were arrested, prosecuted and jailed. They went to prison. Some of my colleagues, who are close to me and know about that story. They still joke about it today that these are your friends that went to prison. Do you know when they are coming out? And do you know if they are coming out reformed or they're coming out worse than when they went? And are you sure that when they come out, they would not want to revenge? Now, I can't answer those questions because I don't know, if they've been reformed in prison, if they found, religion and they are now born again or something, or if they become more hardened. And there's no way I can answer that question on their behalf. So all I can do is constantly be reminded that such people exist, right? And that because of the kind of job that we do, there are people who will be happy with us and there are people who will be unhappy with us. And sometimes, in fact, in most cases, we really can't help who chooses to be happy and who chooses to be unhappy. But what we can help is what steps we take, what measures we make to protect ourselves and just keep going and keep hoping for the best, really. And I think that's all I can say to that question. You can't predict other people's actions. There's no way I can sit here and determine how other people will react to situations. I can only anticipate and take some steps to protect myself, and that's it. But it's a lifelong thing, really. And confidence, I'm sorry, there's a key question I see in the comment section that I
Okay.
thought may be very relevant to address because I assume a lot of us are students. So the question is from Latif Adedoyin. It says, one ethical dilemma that gets me thinking in investigative journalism is undercover reporting. Because on one end, journalists should maintain truth, right? You're not meant to lie, pretend, or secretly record people. But then in reality, some of the biggest stories we've seen were exposed because someone went undercover. My question, if telling the truth requires you to lie first, is that still ethical? I think that's a very important question. And it's an ongoing debate in the industry. There are those who do not believe in the idea of undercover reporting. But there are basic rules and basic standards around undercover reporting. And I thought I should just quickly address them. It must be for overriding public interest. And so the idea of you going undercover, the idea of you choosing to deploy deception and deploy undercover recording equipment on anyone at all must be, one, you have clearly, without ambiguity, you have determined or established prima facie evidence of wrongdoing against that person. There's such prima facie evidence of wrongdoing that you can stand in court if you were, subjected to a prosecution. Two, that the prima facie evidence of wrongdoing is so strong that it establishes a case for overriding public interest. In other words, your action in going undercover, your action in deploying deception is driven by the desire to prevent further commission of an ongoing crime. So if you subject it to that kind of standard, then in my book, it justifies the need to deploy deception and deploy undercover reporting tools. A simple example of that from my experience is sex for grades. When we did sex for grades, perhaps the most popular person in the wrong way from that sex for grades was the university professor in Unilag who was captured trying to molest a lady in his office. He particularly was also a pastor of a local church. Now, in his case, for us to justify deploying deception and undercover reporting about him or on him, we had evidences, testimonies from about 15 women who passed through that lecturer over a period of about 12 years. And 15 unrelated, unconnected women that we spoke to at different times and in different places. What connected them was that they were all previous students of this same man. And they all had similar experiences about that same man. So in other words, when we were making, as an executive producer, when I was making the decision of who should we deploy undercover reporters against and who shouldn't we had to go for someone with that kind of notoriety already, with the kind of evidences that we already have on him, right? And the women who were willing to testify against him in court if it came to that. And we had them on record. So if you've got about 15 women speaking about the same person who teaches in the university and they've had that experience over a decade, right? It means that if you did not do something about him, you are leaving him to continue to damage other women and other girls. And as our story proved, right? Maybe this may not be known to the public. It took us just 2 weeks between deploying an undercover reporter to him and him doing exactly what you saw in that film. It was less than 2 weeks. It tells you again how notorious it become and how much it let down his guard. It's like he's been doing it for so long, he didn't even see anything wrong with it. And the undercover reporter was presented as a child, a 17-year-old, that was introduced to him by her mother. And the mother took the girl to him. The first meeting happened in his church. Say I just finished midweek service on a Wednesday, and then the woman we used as an undercover mother took this undercover reporter, attended this service, and after service went to him and said, this girl wants to get into Unilag. Can you please help him? And that's it. And then he said, okay, fine, come and see me in my office. And the girl went the first time. And then the second time, he tried to rape her. So that shows you just how notorious this gentleman had become. Now, tell me, if we didn't deploy undercover reporting against him, would we have taken him out of that business of molesting and raping young girls who were supposed to have gone to school to learn? So, for me, when you've established that kind of prima facial evidence of wrongdoing against a party or an individual or organization, and you have evidence, of commission of crime ongoing, and that establishes a case of public interest and overriding public interest, that you can then justify taking that criminal or group of criminals out of practice. And that, for me, is the essence of journalism, really. I'm sorry I've taken too much of our time. I think we're supposed to go into a breakout session.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adejimo. So I apologize to every other person who is trying to ask a question. I hope you have another opportunity to get these questions answered. And I'd also like to mention that the Oleshenka Center for Investigative Journalism also provides mental health support to journalists. And in fact, last month we had a mental health seminar for journalists where we had the executive director of ICIR, Mr. Dayo Ayeton, was there. And also we had a therapist, a mental health professional, Dr. Esther Adekoya was also there as well. And then also we, from time to time, assist journalists who have that challenge. So I'd like to mention that. And Mr. Adejimo also mentioned that as well. And like he said, WSCIJ is an institution that we like to, get involved with when any of our programs, activities, all that. So that's why you should follow us on our social media handles so that you can be updated and know when you have opportunities, when you have conversations, when you have programs that will be of benefit to you. So we'll take one poll question, just one poll question, so that we can go to the breakout room. Okay, just give us a moment. The poll questions will come up. So the first question is, okay, I don't think this is a question. Please just hold on. Okay, yes, thank you. So, what is the most common starting point for a high-impact investigative story idea? Personal observation or lived experience, analyzing data, reports, or public records, social media trends and viral conversations, a tip-off or complaint from a member of the community. Seems like we could have many answers, many possible answers here, based on what we learned today. So, but let's hear from you. What do you think the most common starting point for high impact, emphasis on high impact investigative story idea? So more persons are saying personal observation or lived experience. And then we have analyzing data, reports, or public records. What about social media trends? Okay, someone else is saying a tip-off or complaint from a member of the community. Nobody is saying social media trends. Think about it. Is it possible to get a story from social media trends? More persons are going for personal observation or lived experience. Okay. Yes, now somebody is saying social media trends. Thank you. Would that be possible? A tip-off or complaint from a member of the community. Okay. Let's get a few more persons to answer before we end the poll. All right. So more persons said personal observation or lived experience, followed by analyzing data, report, or public records. And then we have a tie between social media trends and viral conversations, and also a tip-off or complaint from a member of the community. Again, the question is, what is the most common starting point for a high-impact investigative story idea? Mr. Adejon, would you like to give feedback on this?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's honestly a very tough one because all of them can lead to, all the options can lead to a high impact investigative story idea, and I think I can, from my experience, say that I have had, stories, high impact stories come from practically all four areas. But I think that the most common would be personal observation or lived experience, because even the idea of social media trend can still be summarized on that personal observation or lived experience. Data analysis, reports or public records can still come under personal observation or lived experience. So perhaps the broadest of them would be personal observation and lived experiences, yeah. But all four individually can give you a very big story, high impact investigative story. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adejuwon. So, now we're going to go over to the breakout sessions. We're going to have 5 different breakout rooms. And so I would like to explain how it's going to work. So you will automatically be sent to a breakout room. So group 1 will focus on governance. You're going to come up with a story idea, and you have 15 minutes to work. After 15 minutes, you will automatically be sent back to the main room. So you have 15 minutes to work. Group 1 is to come up with a story on governance. Group 2 is to come up with a story on health. Group 3 on education. Group 4 on power. And Group 5 on women's issues. I'll take that again. Group 1 on governance. Group 2 on health. Group 3 education. Group 4 power. Group 5 women's issues. So you find yourself in a breakout room. Please work with your team members, and you have one person to present on behalf of your group. Hello guys, good afternoon. This is group one, and you're to come up with a story on governance. And someone is supposed to present to the whole to everybody in the next less than 15 minutes already. You have 8 minutes left, and it seems like nobody has started. We have Ismail Gambo, Muhammad, Nafisa from University of Ilorin as well. Hello, somebody here? Only Yomi Favor.
from there. Please, Miriam Shitu, can you confirm that you can do this? Please.
Yes, and
Okay, please, Miriam Shitu, please go ahead and then take it. Please, were you taking note of the points I was making?
yes, I had some of the points you're
Yeah,
taking.
stress. How did I'm stressed become a normal English,
Yes,
normal vocabulary? How do
exactly.
people hide under that okay, whereby they are stressed psychologically, they are going through a lot of things and
Yeah.
we can't see it. Plenty. Okay, other things. I don't know.
So we have the starting points. Please let's go over it again. Mariam, are you there? So in the first point, you say right now on this Zoom call in this room, there's someone, smiling silently, but they are struggling. They have deadlines, they have things piling up, and the struggle and the pressure to always want to be smart and be outstanding in class and all of that expectation choking them, and no one notices. And this is what stress look like when it hides. And that is why we must talk about mental health, because the fact that we are in school trying to make good grades, and then we also have to balance it with the stress that comes with it. And then you go again with your question hook. When did being constantly tired, anxious, and overwhelmed becomes something normal? And when did I'm stressed stop being a warning sign and start becoming a lifestyle? So it's something we see every day. We have people who smile in class every day, but they are going through it. Even me, I'm a testimony of it. So yeah. And then you come up again with your statistic points. We live in a generation where stress is worn like a badge of honor, but behind it is a burnout, anxiety, stress, tired, and frustrated breakdowns. So this sets our tone right. Then we transition into today. You stand to argue that mental health is not a luxury. It is a necessity, and stress, when ignored, become a silent destroyer of potential. So regardless of anything that we do, regardless of how many work we put into studying and everything, if these things are ignored, like it destroys potential ultimately. So what is then the
Hello, group 5. Anybody home? Group 5. I can see Latif Adedoyin. Are you guys done?
Hello, group 3.
Who is speaking for you guys? Okay, group 5, you guys are ready to have something on domestic violence. So you have a few minutes more, few seconds more rather. So pick someone who is going to speak for your team, and ensure that, like you were taught, that your topic, your story idea is clear, focused, timely, and relevant. Ensure that it's not too broad. Ensure that you have an angle. Ensure that you have evidence and you have it. All right. So group 5, all the best.
Thank you. You are going to start with this. We are going back to the other.
So sorry, who is representing us for?
If you have points on that topic, okay.
I thought we chose one topic already. So who is the person that is going to represent us for the group?
You can help us with
What? Oh, are we going back to general group now? Oh,
Not yet, not yet, sir.
we are back to the general group.
Not yet.
Okay, so those are some of the things we expect from you. Look at what angles are you pitching your story. The power is broad, so don't just stay on what every newspaper report. Try to streamline it to your story. Of course, if you want to talk about the whole Nigeria, what angle are you looking at it from that will be relevant to your people in your school? You
Yeah, that's
understand?
why I'm thinking that we should do it like
I
living
think
in
you are
darkness, how it
presenting for your
affects
group now.
Nigerian students. Hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope we had an engaging time. So one person is going to speak for your group, and you have 4 minutes to present your pitch. So ensure that, you learned a lot today, so I hope that you're able to apply everything you learned into coming up with story ideas. I would not want to start, I would not want to follow the numbers as it is. So I would start from group three. If you're the person presenting from group three, let me just see your hand and then you're unmuted and you can begin. Three, please. Who is presenting from group three? Please raise your hand and I will unmute you. All right, Maria. Okay, did you lower your hand? Are you ready? Was it her network? Okay, group three is not ready. Should we let's go to group two? Group two, please. Group two. Who's presenting for group two? Okay, go ahead. Yeah, 4 minutes.
All right. A very good afternoon to everybody. Here, it's good to be here again today. My name is Muazu Salim from Bayero University, Kano. Our group is to talk about health, a story, to pitch a story from health, health sector. We identify something that cut across race, cut across religion and whatever, which is wrong diagnostic. You go to hospitals and somebody is probably having migraine, and then they are telling him that, oh, it's a sign of maybe fever, or they're telling you malaria or typhoid or whatever, and then they're giving him drugs, prescribing drugs, or sometimes they even tell you it's high blood pressure. All of these diagnostics, and then which takes me to question of whether it comes down to stress or lack of staff, where people are understaffed and then they are stressed. You have a situation where there was a story where a doctor died because he had a 3 straight uh, days shift where he was working again and again and again. And then this whole wrong diagnostic also, we can talk about situation that I have come across here in Kaduna, where a lady lost her baby because an intramuscular injection was given to her baby as intravenous injection, which if you know drugs, you know that intramuscular, once you put it in the vein, it begins to coagulate the blood that is running through the vein. So, which is a very, very bad thing. So, is it a problem of regulatory bodies, people who are supposed to do check and balances, who are supposed to sanction all of these things? Or is it an issue of people being overworked? Or is it issue of people, the training process, where you did not even learn what you were supposed to as a doctor or a medical practitioner or as a pharmacist? Is it all of these things? This is some of the things that we're going to raise in the stories, where we're asking this question of the regulatory bodies, the training of the staff, either pharmacist or doctor or whatever. Then we're asking also, is it that they are being overworked, or there are less staff concerning all of this? Is this all of the things that are leading to wrong diagnostic, where people will have to deal with the consequences of it, where sometimes it's death. It leads to death, people losing their life because of wrong diagnostic, because someone along the way did not do their job properly. So this is something that I would love to investigate with this story idea and get to the bottom of it. I know it's going to raise a lot of questions. A lot of people will be contacted. We're talking about people who are affected, the bodies, the hospitals, the doctors, the practitioners, and all of those. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. For the other groups, please be reminded that you have just 4 minutes. Thank you, Salih Ibrahim. So let's go to group one. Group one on governance. Group one. Who is speaking for group 1? Let's see your hand and we'll ask you to unmute. Group 1, please. By the way, let's appreciate group 2. Let's give them a virtual round of applause. So Ismail Gambo, you're speaking for group 1. Please go ahead. Please, can you turn on your camera? Okay, thank you.
All right, you are okay. You are welcome. Yeah, thank you very much. As I was saying, we chose on government, which the story angle or the story idea of it is to track and analyze between the budget and the reality, tracking public funds and the service delivery in the local communities. Because we normally see that in Nigeria generally, particularly here in the north or other southern parts of the country, there are some issues that affect sectors that such as such as school sector, health sector, and much more. So this story idea is going to just investigate whether if the government spending is being allocated in the right and the appropriate sector, and if the budget is done, so has it been allocated also based on that politicking or project that has been assigned to be conducted? So reaching the people to find out such issues that they are encountering in those sectors, such as particularly as the previous speaker spoke from group 3. So like in the health care sector, there are challenges which need to be treated. You will find the government has budgeted or given a huge amount of money just to build a particular ward that it will be taking care of those who are affected in so and so diseases. But at the end of the day, you will find out that that amounts of money, that projects has never been met to its end. And then also it focuses, it will also focus on the story idea will focus on the specific communities where there is a visible gap between official claims and lived reality. So without taking much of the time, this is the story idea, and it is based on the story map. That's by using the clear reporting structure as we have been recommended or taught today. That's by using what, where, and rest. So this is our contribution to it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Please, what school are you from? We just like to know that.
So I'm from BUK, Barry University, Kano.
BUK, Barry University, Kano. Thank you. Please take group 5 now. But please, when you are speaking, kindly show us your video, turn on your camera, and then also tell us your name and your school and the group you're representing before you begin. So group 5, please speaking for group 5. Can I see your hand? And then I will unmute you. Somebody from group 5. Group 5, are you ready? 5, please. Okay. Let's go to group 4. Group 4. Who's representing group 4? All right, love it, Isaac. Please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Lovett Isaac. So I'm the representative of Group 4 from the Federal Polytechnic of Vida. So our topic is power, and we tend to see how living in darkness affects Nigerian students. So one of the angles that we're looking at it for, first of all, is that power affects everybody, especially students. Let's put it that way, because that's our focus. Because whether you're a polytechnic student or a university student, I want to believe that power affects everybody. Now, how does power affect the students living in the university? One of the ways where power affects us is the lack of electricity to charge our phones. We have to go and pay money outside to be able to charge our phones. Pay, if it's your phone, maybe 300, depending on your location, or if it is your power bank, probably 500 naira, or depending on how much they are collecting. So that's one of the way it doesn't give us that access to, for instance, if they give us assignments to do and there's a deadline for it, because of this thing now, we can't be able to meet up to the deadline, because sometimes you don't even have this money because you are trying to survive on other things as well. So that's one of the way it affects us. And we can't really read at night because we don't have power. We try to see how we can survive based on lamp holders, torchlights, etc. We try to see how we can survive based on these things to be able to read for our exams, because currently now we're writing exams, and I can tell you that for 2 days, for 2 days now, there have been no lights. So it's basically torchlights that we have been surviving on. So we also see how when sometimes in my school, when you go to submit a particular document, let's say they say you should submit your ND results or something, when you go there and you want to submit, of course you can submit the original. When you get there, and this information are not even passed on time, is when you get there, you'll be told that you are not supposed to submit that original, you need to do a photocopy. And instead of them to photocopy it there for you, they are asking you to go out of the school environment to go and photocopy it, because they don't have power to be able to photocopy this, thereby making you to spend more money, whereas that's not your plan, that's not what you are supposed to do. So there are various other ways that power tends to affect us that are Nigerian students. So apart from that angle, we tend to look at what is the Nigerian government also doing concerning this power. Not just the Nigerian government, the school in particular, what are they doing? Are they providing generators for the instance I just cited? If they are maybe during weekly days or school activities, they'll try to put the gen on so that the school workers can carry out their activities. Are they doing something like that? Okay, what are the governments doing concerning these things? What ways can we see? Okay, what can they help to? What ways are they helping students to be able to do all of these things? So that's the range at which we are looking at. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Loveth. So the next group 3, are you ready? Yes, okay. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shitsi Mary. I'm from University of Abuja, and I'm representing Group 3, which our pitch is education, and we are going to talk about stress as a companion in student education. We realize that most students have deadlines, they have after-school work, they always have to meet up with expectations, they have parents who are looking up to them to have a particular grade, which they're always so stressed and choked up to be able to which are always so stressed and choked up with all the overwhelm that they usually have, and it actually affects them mentally as students. This is why we decided to pitch our story to students, where we know that this is why we decided to pitch our stories to mental health for students, because we know that when you're in school on the norms, you come with stress and everything, are constantly being tired, anxious, and overwhelmed, becoming something normal. When did stress stop being a warming sign and start becoming a lifestyle? So it's something we see every day. We have people who smile in class every day, but they are going through it. Even me, I'm a testimony of it too, because as a school reporter, going to education, attending conferences, trying to also keep up with my grades and things, it's so overwhelming sometimes that you have to break down. And some students have crying because of it, and you come out the following day with a smile on your faces, and people think that, okay, yes, she's perfectly all right. So this is why we decided to pitch our stories to students, pitch our stories to stress, which we know it affects students both mentally, physically, and emotionally, which can lead to them trying to be isolated from others. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you for your idea. Please let's applaud group 3. All right. Group 5. Are you ready? Group 5. All right. Azizat, group 5, please speak.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Azizat from the Department of Mass Communication, University of Ilorin, and I will be representing Group 5. Our prompt was basically on women's issues, and the first thing that came to our mind is on
Azizat, we can't hear you.
of
Seems like
violence against women, domestic violence.
Azizat, please can you come again? We're having difficulties with hearing you.
Oh, okay. I am from the University of Ilorin and I'll be representing Group 5. So our prompt was to focus on women's issues. And the first thought that we had was on violence against women, because this is a very prevalent issue. Even in the Nigerian media nowadays, there's always one issue or the other surrounding violence against women. So we decided to attenuate this down a bit to domestic violence against women. Because we can say that quite following the facts, about I think 1 in 3 women experience physical violence, and almost 80% of this 80% of these physical violence issues come from, intimate partners, husbands, and the likes. But then we decided to look into it like introspectively, deeper, and consider more of the issues surrounding maybe the Nigerian value system that supported this for this long, and this issue is still being this prevalent, and little to nothing is being done about it. So we don't want to use the usual sources or focus too much on what we already know, because we know about these experiences, we have evidences and the likes. So we decided to look into what the security agencies or the police are actually doing to these cases of violence. And I watched a podcast recently, and it was talking about how some of these police officers are actually the ones perpetrating, including women. And this is not, they are not even arrested. According to this podcast, this individual was not even arrested because of any crime. I think this was because the lady in question failed to give the police officer a number or something, and then she got arrested and locked in cell. There's no justice system whatsoever. There's no evidences whatsoever. Everyone just does whatever they want. So I think we're going to implement a sort of multi-source approach to this. We're going to look into the experiences of these women. We're going to look into some of the witnesses, what they have to say about this, and then probably conduct a sort of undercover investigation, if necessary, to really see firsthand how these issues are going. And this is very important. This is a very important discourse, because this is going on for far too long. It's overly normalized now. It's seen as normal. Like everyone is now on the edge. Police that's supposed to be the friend are now becoming the foe, the very critical one at that. So I think, yeah, that is the main reason and the main purpose for focusing on these issues. And as it is, investigative journalism is something that is very dear in the line of our practice, because it is to unveil issues that we think we know about, but we really need to have a more deeper insight into. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Azizat. Thank you. So that's all the groups. So before I hand over to Mr. Adijon to give his feedback, I would like to remind you all to please fill our post-training feedback assessment form. Let's know how we can do better. Let's know your experiences. We sent a link for one yesterday, and we're also sending a link for another one. So please fill the feedback forms. Let's know how the training went for you. So now I'm going to hand over to Mr. Adejumon to give his feedback. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for the lovely and powerful pitches that you've all presented. Of course, I took notes as I was listening to to each of those pitches. And I must, commend the ideas, yeah, the diversity of the ideas themselves, and the kind of focus that those ideas have, and the what I call the ambitions behind those ideas. I really like them. I think they already point to the fact that we're doing something useful here, and that we've learned something useful as well. So I'm happy about that, and I thank everyone who've been involved in that. To analyze or give some feedback, I'm just going to go back to our session and remind us about each structure template, where we spoke about the need to have a story idea, the core question that story is going to answer, why does it matter, who is affected, and then what is the reporting plan. So basically, if we look at it from that perspective, it would have helped the presentation of our pitches, to be more concise and just straight to the point. And that's one thing I think was missing from virtually all the pitches. A few, maybe one or two, came a bit close to answering those questions, but honestly, none of us actually really answered those questions in this way. And it's not like we didn't attempt to answer some of those questions. We did. I saw them and I noted them, and I'll get to them as we speak on each group now. But I just wanted to say this generally, that when you pitch, hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of pitches come in. So the editor is looking through those pitches, is busy, is under pressure, So there has to be a structured way for the editor to be able to see your idea and be able to pick those key points straight away. So, okay, this is what this story is about. This is the core question that this story is trying to address. This is why it matters. This is who is going to be affected. And this is the reporting plan for the story. So at a glance, she should be able to see those key points and say, yeah, I'm interested in this. So that's why it's nice to have that kind of structure. Now let's go to group one. Like, I want to take it in the order 1 to 5, right? So group one spoke about budgets and reality, the gap between budget and reality, tracking the gap between budgeted funds and actual projects delivered. Challenge is, yes, there's a story there, definitely actually a nice story, but the way it was presented was too broad, did not clearly indicate who is affected, and then the reporting plan. Those are the gaps that I saw in the presentation of that idea. So there's a gap between budget and reality. That exists almost everywhere across the country, or in most places across the country. So if we're telling that kind of story, what's the core question we're addressing? Gap between budget and reality. Where exactly are we telling that story from? So we need to drill down and say, in so location, on so project ABC, located in community XYZ, a particular road, for instance, has been tarred 3 times on paper, but in the reality, that road leads to nowhere. There's no road, and then again, it helps to tell the story from human angle, because budget and projects are about people. So if there's supposed to be a road leading from point A to point B, and it's been budgeted for like 3 or 4 times over the decade, and yet there's nothing to show for it. Can we tell that story from the perspective of someone who used that road, or someone who ought to have used that road and couldn't use the road? Do we have instances where this impacts on, say, a woman trying to get to the hospital to deliver a baby and she couldn't get there on time because the road is bad or there's no road? So let's carve it from a personal experience or someone's, we're telling somebody's story so that we can connect with our audiences and they are sure about the specific instances that we are talking about. Otherwise, it will be too broad, like I said, because budget is in almost every aspect of life: health, education, this, that, that, that. So which one do you want to pick? You get confused about which area you want to narrow down to. For group 2, wrong diagnosis, again, that had a similar challenge with what I had pointed out with group 1. Great story idea, powerful one, actually, if told with the specific question of what's the core question? Why does it matter? Why does it matter now? And what are we telling now that is different from what has been told before? And then who is affected? And what is the way we want to report the story of who is affected? So if we take it from there, it will help us to be able to define the story we want to tell and make it clearer to the commissioning editor. And you will see that because we didn't do that, it reflected in the way the pitch was presented. We spoke about doctor dying because they were overworked or overwhelmed, sometimes leading to wrong decisions, sometimes leading to, then talking about regulatory lapses, then talking about, lapses in training of doctors. These are all valid points, each of which could actually form the golden thread of a story. So if you pick the issue of poor training of doctors, that can be a whole story on its own. And that can be you telling the story of the link between wrong diagnosis and poor training of doctors, or the link between wrong diagnosis and doctors being overworked. That in itself can be a story. So what you have now is that you're touching on so many things, and because you're going to touch on too many things, chances are that you won't be able to properly treat each of them, and at the end of the day, we will have a story that won't be strong enough and that won't have that emotional connection to the audience. If I go to pitch 3, which is about education, I think Miriam presented, and Miriam spoke about stress in education, narrowed down to mental health and how it affects students. I think it's one of the closest to group 3 came very close to defining what the story is, narrowing it down to, the subject matter, and then answering the core question, and then also went ahead to talk about why it matters in terms of why the stress matters and how stress affects students, why that matters. Similar issues, not being able to clearly define whose story we're telling. Yes, student story, but student story is almost like saying you want to tell the story of the students in Unilag and students in Abuja and students in Nasarawa, whereas there are similarities, that might be similarities in their experiences. They exist in totally different areas and totally different regions that may have peculiar challenges that may not be the same across. So it may be the case that we're telling the story of, and I'm making up a name, Aisha. And Aisha is a year 3 student in Nasarawa State University, and this is the story of Aisha. And then by the time we've built the story and experience of Aisha, other students in other parts of the country will begin to see similarities between their experiences and the experiences of Aisha. So they see themselves in Aishat's experience and they see themselves in Aishat's life. But we're telling the story of Aishat, if you get what I mean. And that way, other students can see, oh, this is similar or this is slightly different from what we face in our own area. But we've got to narrow to a subject, tell the story of that subject matter, and use that subject matter as a peg to discuss what may look like a broader issue. Same thing goes for group 4, speaking about power. Living in darkness affects how living in darkness affects students. Yeah, establish a problem, a core issue, a core question, and then also establish how it might affect students. But students where, and because students where, right? When you answer that question, it might totally change the kind of story you are telling and the experience of those students, because location sometimes also may oftentimes may change the experience that people have in those specific places. So tell, I'm always for tell the story from the human angle, try and see whose story are we telling. If it is one, if it is 2 or 3 people story that we're telling, and then we're now using them as a peg to launch into what might look like a broader issue. But people can see themselves, see their experiences in the eye or through the eyes of the 1 or 2 persons story that we are leading with. Violence against women, and drawing down to domestic violence against women in Nigeria, and looking at cultural factors that support these practices, and mentioned the use of undercover reporting and mentioned the police. Now, I think Group 5 exemplifies what I've been saying about narrowing down, right? So we went from violence against women to domestic violence against women to violence perpetrated by police, right? That the idea of violence perpetrated by police in itself is a story on its own, that you can tell, and that can give you a very big story, which also speaks to what I've said before about narrowing down why does the story matter, and what are we telling now that is new or different. So the general subject of domestic violence or violence against women, is something that is ongoing, it's been reported and it's still being reported, and there's a lot of talks around it, at least to some extent. But if you narrow your own story to address the question of what's new or what's different, to say, okay, our own angle of telling the story of violence against women is the police angle. So specifically, we're entering that issue from the angle of where this violence is perpetrated by those who are supposed to be a form of protection, people in authority who are supposed to be a form of protection, who are supposed to offer protection to women, are now abusing women. You see, it escalates the emotional angle of that story. It escalates the urgency of the story. It escalates the importance of the story. It carves your story idea out of the lot of people talking about, gender-based violence or violence against women. So it begins to clearly define what kind of story you want to tell and makes you stand out amongst other pitches that might have been submitted to the editor on violence against women. You see, so if you narrow down to the police angle, and then maybe we're telling the story from the perspective of a woman or a group of women who I've had instances where they ran to the police for protection and for support, but ended up, further abused by the police. And that becomes a lovely angle to get into that story, and then be able to tell a unique, story. So, and then whether that would now require undercover reporting or not, I think is a question that would need to be answered in the course of reporting the story. And I'm saying that because I remember that I didn't mention it when I was answering the question of undercover reporting. In most cases, undercover reporting is considered like your last resort. You go for undercover reporting because it becomes, unavoidable. It's totally necessary. You've tried every other option, but you can't tell this story effectively without undercover reporting. So it's not your first go-to option. It's not your second go-to option. It's your last resort. And it must be because you've seen a bigger scale of story to tell, and there's no other better way to tell it than to go undercover. Right. So yeah, I think that's my view of the pitches that I've submitted. Well done, everyone. Thank you very much. Brilliant ideas and brilliant presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adejuwon. Thank you, everybody. Please, can you appreciate yourselves, and also appreciate Mr. Adejuwon for his guidance and his support. I'm pretty sure that today's session has really given you lots of important insights into the stories that you are concerned about. Okay. Once again, I want to appreciate Mr. Adejuwon and every student that has participated here today. Thank you for being part of today's session. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mariam Alo, to take over the rest of the session for today. Thank you, and have a great day.
Okay, am I audible? Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you ever so much, Mr. Adejuwon, for that very powerful session. I must say that I am not part of the participating students, but at the point I was on the edge of my seat, I was waiting to hear the next story that you went on the cover for. And I can suitably say that everyone in this room is impressed by the wealth of experience that you brought to the table today. On behalf of WSCIJ, I would like to thank every one of us for being here. I want to thank the participating students. I want to thank the members of faculty from the participating schools that are in attendance today, as well as those that were in attendance yesterday. I want to especially thank Dr. Mena for being here with us today again. And a very, very special thanks to Mr. Adejuwon Shoyinka for bringing the wealth of experience that you have gathered over the years into this session today. The students and the members of staff at WSCIJ learned a great deal from you today, sir. Thank you so much for your time and for giving us all these very impactful insights. At this stage of the training, we would like to take a group picture. So please, for those of us that have been hiding, and not turning on our videos, could you please take a picture? We want you to turn on your videos so that we can take our group picture and leave them on till the end of the training. I'd also like to remind us that we have a post-training assessment survey in the chat box. Please take a minute to click on the link and fill out the survey. It's very important because this guides the center in putting together trainings for students and journalists for future purposes. So it's really important that we hear from you on how your experience was, what we did well, what we can do better, and how we can improve future trainings just like this. Also, don't forget to follow WSCIJ on our social media handles, um, connect with us, talk about your experience with us on social media. Again, this helps to drive the content that we're putting out there and drive awareness on the trainings that WSCIJ provides. I just want to mention, because during the training, someone noted mental health issues. I'd like to say that WSCIJ on its own part does arrange um, mental health workshops for investigative journalists, because we acknowledge the fact that investigative journalism is not just physically taxing, but also mentally taxing. And so WSCIJ does its own part in providing mental health support for investigative journalists. So please follow us on social media. Don't hesitate to say something about the center. I'd like for our participants to, as a last note, give us a comment on how they found the training. You can speak, you can ask to be unmuted, or you can put it in the chat box. You don't need permission for that. Just ask to be unmuted. But at the end of the training, we'd like to see. Okay, so Muad Salih Ibrahim, please unmute him so that he can give a few remarks, as well as Dr. Maina to give his remarks immediately after.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. I would also like to thank Dr. Adejuan Shoyinka. The first time I saw the Sweet coding was in 2018 at Kaduna Books and Art Festival. I didn't even know who was the producer of that story, but I know that Ruona J. Mayer was there as the person who was talking about the documentary. So thank you very much. I heard about the training from the faculty, and I was nominated from the Faculty of Communication, Bayero University, Kano. And I would like to say a very big thank you to the center and all of the trainees and even the students who have gained a wealth of experience from what they have said. And I've had a lot of takeaways from how much they have angles that I didn't even think of. So thank you very much to the center and to all of the facilitators and every student that took part in the training.
Go ahead, Dr. Maina.
Dr. Maina, please, we cannot hear you. Maybe your device has a sound issue. Dr. Maina?
Okay, Dr. Maina, we can't hear you. So we would also appreciate if you could, we'd really like to hear what you have to say. So if we can't hear you, please, you could put your comments in the chat box so that we can see what you wanted to say. Thank you all once again for being a part of this training. We're happy that you all took the time to join us. We know that it couldn't have been easy. We understand that some of the students that were in attendance yesterday had exams today, and I'm sure that even those of you that are here had other commitments. Thank you once again for taking out that time to join us. These things are important, Engagements outside of the classroom are just as important as engagements within the classroom. Again, thank you ever so much. Dr. Maynard, you would like to attempt to say something again?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I was having issues with my network. Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity for my students and I to participate in this wonderful training. It's a very wonderful training for me. And just like the way you observed from the beginning, you said there's a gap between the class and the field, which I actually accept. There's a program I attended with CJID, and that was my appeal to them that made them allow me to be on that program. What I feel is very important is that more lecturers should be involved in the training. Why am I saying this? Is because we get to train more students than these ones that they are being trained for your program. Like for now, we're going to train more than hundreds of students. Maybe for them, they'll be graduating in some few years. And the industry, I think, according to our meeting with CJID, they said there are things they need the students who are graduating from the university to know before they come to the industry so that the industry does not have to start training them afresh again. So that's why I felt it was important for staff or faculty to be on this wonderful program. And I'm very happy that you've allowed me to be on this. Today's session and yesterday's session has exposed me to so many things, I think, experience on the field, so that if I synchronize that with what I'm teaching in the class that we get on theory in books, I think it will be more solidified for students to get more experience than just teaching theories and ignoring the field. So thank you very much for having me on this program. I look forward to attending your programs. And for the guest speaker today, please, if you could get me linked to some of his programs, if we're doing trainings, we'd like to attend so that we know, so that we could teach students and have good graduates. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you for giving the center another opportunity to enrich its already existing ecosystem. Thank you for being with us and for allowing us to take up so much of your time. So, like I said, please follow us on our social media handles. Don't forget to fill out the post evaluation questionnaire and do have yourselves a very good day. You can write about our 2-day training. You can give a recap. What stood out for you? What were your key takeaways? Yes, those are the kinds of things that we'd like to see so that we know that our trainings are hitting the mark and we're delivering what we promised. Again, thank you all so very much. Do have yourselves a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the week. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.